Hey guys! So, while time machines still only exist in science fiction movies, we know of the best way to immerse ourselves in the bygone eras and experience the spirit of those times. We're talking about rare, historical photographs. True time capsules that allow us to peer into the past and see the world as it was decades or even centuries ago. The art of photography has allowed us to capture events, faces, and moments of the past, preserving them on paper as embodiments of a particular time in history. We can stroll through the streets of old cities, enter the homes of our ancestors, and view the world through their eyes. We can also see the details of their daily life, fashion, architecture, and surroundings that have receded into the past but still live on in hearts and memory. So, in today's video, you'll get to see a collection of interesting old photos. This snapshot was taken somewhere on a highway in India. Two elephants are touching with their trunks in a sweet farewell gesture. They were being transported to different zoos in the 1960s. Mujahideen carrying leather sacks to cross a river, Afghanistan, 1980. The engine room of the German submarine UB-110, 1918. The SM UB-110, a coastal torpedo submarine of the type UB-3, was built in the Hamburg docks of Blohm & Voss for the needs of the Imperial German Navy. It was launched on March 23, 1918. 4 months later, on July 19, 1918, it was sunk by the British ships HMS Gary, HMS ML-49, and HMS ML-263. 39 crew members died. The submarine was later taken ashore for repairs at Swan Hunter and Wigham Richardson docks in Wallsend, but the project was abandoned, and the submarine was sold for scrap metal. This and other photographs were taken in late 1918. In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, the interior of the submarine heated up so much that condensation formed on the walls. The temperatures in the compartments reached 37 degrees Celsius, creating tropical heat. The humidity caused the machine oil particles to spread throughout the boat, covering everything. Any liquid quickly absorbed the greasy residue, and food took on an oily taste. The air was stagnant, only ventilated during resurfacing, which was infrequent during extended missions. Heat and moisture laden with fuel oil, the stench of sewage, which could only be disposed of when surfaced, and the smell of unwashed bodies due to the lack of showers created a bad reputation for submariners. Bicycling down the steps of the U.S. Capitol on the American Star Bicycle, 1885. A horse-drawn carriage, pulled by a pair of buffaloes in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 1900. In the 1820s, every African American in America dreamed of returning to their homeland, where there would be no discrimination and no white oppressors. The African paradise included abundant food and alluring freedom. White American activists raised funds and organized a movement to repatriate blacks to their homeland. The state of Liberia was created. Former slaves from the USA returned to Africa, where they used weapons to seize land from the local tribes and turned them into slaves. The photo shows a family of new slave owners: father, mother, 2 sons, and 3 female slaves, servants and cooks. Monrovia, Liberia, 1910s. In 1925, the trial of John Thomas Scopes began. Tennessee authorities accused him of violating the Butler Act, a law that prohibited the teaching of Darwin's theory of evolution in schools. The best lawyers of that time defended the schoolteacher. They even attempted to involve Herbert Wells in the defense, though unsuccessfully. Nevertheless, Scopes was found guilty and fined $100. The Butler Act was only repealed in 1967. This trial went down in history as the Scopes monkey trial. The office of the A.J. Coupe Factory, 1911, Alexandrovsk, Russian Empire. The photograph is notable as the earliest surviving image of the factory that produced the first Soviet subcompact car, Zaporozhets, Disposal of urban waste into the river in Paris, 1910. After the American Civil War, the availability of natural resources, new inventions, and a vast market led to rapid industrialization. The demand for labor also increased, and by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many children joined the workforce. Wages in factories were minimal, so children often had to work to help their parents earn enough money for food. Over 20 years, by 1910, the number of working children over the age of 15 had increased from 1.5 to 2 million. These young workers rarely experienced the joys of childhood. The luxury of attending school to gain knowledge and a chance for a better life was seldom afforded to them. Hard labor inflicted irreparable harm to children's health. They suffered from malnutrition, stunted growth, spinal deformities, tuberculosis, and bronchitis, especially those who worked in coal mines and cotton plantations, not to mention physical and psychological exhaustion. A pre-war cheerleading team for the troops, 3rd Infantry Division, Hawaii, USA, 1933 to 38. George Harry Galt was sent to the British colony of Uganda and was appointed as a tax collector in Ankole, a kingdom in Uganda. Galt was a cruel officer and treated the local residents harshly. On May 19, 1905, Galt forced the locals to carry him from Fort Portal to Abanda without allowing them to take a rest. The natives carried him to Katumu, 3 kilometers from Abanda. There, the officer stopped to take a rest in a government house. When the exhausted Ugandans told the people of Katumu about the officer's cruelty, the locals were outraged. One of them, named Rutarka, threw a spear at Galt, who was sitting on the government house grounds. The spear hit Galt in the chest, and he died shortly thereafter. Galt was 33 years old at the time of his death. VIP observers in the inner courtyard of the Officers' Beach Club on Perry Island, illuminated by the explosion of an 81-kiloton bomb as part of Operation Greenhouse, April 8, 1951. Beachgoers using ropes for safe swimming in Southend, England. Bathing suits from the early 20th century, 1909. A policeman measuring the length of a woman's swimsuit on the beach to ensure it complies with the established requirements. West Palm Beach. A policeman issuing a fine for wearing a bikini on the beach in Rimini, Italy, 1957. Disturbance of public order, Washington, 1922. Women could be arrested for showing their legs when wearing one-piece swimsuits on the beach. Such swimsuits were banned by law in many U.S. states in the 1920s. In the photo, 2 bathers accompanied by a beach policeman are being detained for wearing swimsuits that were too short, resulting in their arrest. A family of milk vendors heading to the local market in Brussels, Belgium, sometime in the 1890s. In some parts of Europe, dogs were used to pull carts even in the early 20th century. Delivery of sweet soda Coca-Cola in Knoxville, USA, 1919. A BMW Schneekrad snowmobile parked on the street, 1936. Archaeologists having lunch in the tomb of Pharaoh Ramses XI, Egypt, 1923. They are unaware of the infamous Curse of the Pharaohs. You have to agree, it's quite strange to hold a banquet, especially in someone's tomb. Lord George Carnarvon, who financed the excavations and took this photograph, suddenly died in April of the same year. It was then that rumors of the pharaohs emerged, which supposedly befalls anyone who opens an ancient Egyptian tomb. It can be manifested in a mysterious illness or an accident that ends in death. However, it turned out to be a newspaper hoax. Most members of Howard Carter's expedition lived to be 70 years old, and the famous archaeologist himself, who discovered the untouched tomb of Ramses XI with the incredible artifacts, died at the age of 64 in a comfortable bed. Nevertheless, it still is customary for archaeological expeditions to refrain from entering tombs immediately after their discovery. It is believed that ancient microorganisms, gases, and millennia-old mold can harm the modern human body. Therefore, The discoveries are allowed time to air out, after which gas masks are worn to take air samples for testing. Moving a multi-story building weighing 7,600 tons for the construction of a boulevard in Albia Iulia, Romania, 1987. First, the ground in the building's path was leveled. Then a foundation was dug on one side, and trolleys and jacks were placed underneath it. Slowly, the building was dragged along the temporary rails. After moving a short distance, the process was repeated. The photo shows the halfway point. Animal headwear, a strange and unusual phenomenon that continued the widespread interest in taxidermy in the second half of the 19th century. During this time, people pushed the creative boundaries with unprecedented interest and dedication, resorting to sometimes contradictory practices. Just think of the stuffed dead rabbits studying in the library. Such models and depictions were at their peak of popularity in the Victorian era. Depicting deceased animals in human roles in ordinary human everyday scenes like reading a book, having tea, or playing croquet was particularly popular. However, the most esteemed among the Victorian fashionistas was the practice of putting dead animals on their heads. It remains a mystery how and why this trend was so beloved among the most elite echelons of society, but the fact remains. Representatives of the upper class proudly paraded the streets with various deceased creatures on their heads. The most common hats were birds, but squirrels, mice, and kittens were also frequently encountered. And to prevent the animals from decomposing, they were often stuffed with cyanide. So that's one strange trend of the past. While the socialites flirted away and had fun, the poison slowly got into her body. It took over a decade for this hazardous fad to go out of style. Service of horseback librarians, who delivered books to the most remote and inaccessible corners of the state of Kentucky, USA, in the 1940s. Occultus, or Barbarossa robot, created by Adolf Whitman around 1909. Radiomensch Occultus is the full name of the robot in German, and it seemed that it got its nickname Barbarossa for the magnificent beard. Inventor Herr Whitman created a robot that could perform human movements, speak, sing, and even whistle. Whitman himself said, "I hold the world in the palm of my hand. I could be emperor of the universe, for I've invented an artificial man who could compel all other men to become my slaves. Bullets and shells don't scare the robots. They can replace slaves in factories and courts, and I will buy the whole planet." At that time, the creator was considered both a genius and insane. Meanwhile, history remains silent about what happened to the Barbarossa robot later. Experimental car propelled by a propeller, USA, 1921. A U.S. bombing victim, a Cambodian woman named Dan San Huol, is being carried to an improvised operating room in a mangrove swamp on the Kamau Peninsula. This is a real, unposed photograph. However, the photographer deemed the photo unremarkable and never submitted it to the press. 1970. A herd of elephants before mass extermination truly meant a herd. This photo was taken in 1976 in the Savo province, Kenya. On July 12, 1929, the giant flying boat Dornier 2X first took to the air. It was the largest, heavier-than-air aircraft in the world at the time. The aircraft was equipped with powerful high-altitude American Curtiss Conqueror V-12 liquid-cooled engines, 610 horsepower each. Since the Versailles Treaty prohibited Germany from producing heavy multi-engine airplanes, the company Dornier built an aviation plant in Switzerland, on the shore of Lake Constance, specifically for the construction of this aircraft. One of the 2X records remained unbroken until the second half of the 20th century. On October 20th, 1929, it took off with 150 passengers and 19 crew members on board. This was a fantastic capacity for those times, as no aircraft could carry more than 50 people. However, such capacity turned out to be unnecessary. It would be nearly 3 decades before the era of mass passenger air travel and multi-seat airliners arrived. 2X was converted into a luxurious flying hotel for 66 passengers, who could travel in maximum comfort. However, it wasn't in demand even in this capacity. By 1933, it was retired to an aviation museum after approximately 70 flights. In 1943, the British bombed it at its final resting place. A memento photo for those who participated in the design and construction of the flying giant. Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, whose assassination would trigger the start of World War I, is photographed next to a real mummy sarcophagus around 1894. Well, that's all for today, friends. Be sure to like the video, and if you learned something new, let me know in the comments, and we'll see you next time.